Incorrect, but I'm going to try. So asante sana kwa ajili ya kahudra presentation yangu. So basically what I said, karibuni is welcome you all. Habari zenu is how are you all doing? And then thank you for coming to my presentation. So what I'm going to talk about is this title here, It's Your World, So Change It. This is basically from the focus groups that we conducted in Tanzania about youth civic engagement. And we asked them, like, how is it that you understand this term, youth civic engagement? Scholars talk about it, civic engagement. And so this is one of the groups said, it's your world, so change it. I kind of like that. And I'll be reflecting on not only my project, but a lot about what it's like to live abroad. I have pictures in here, and I would have had just a whole picture stuff, like, oh, this is what the Serengeti looks like, and here's what Ngorongoro Crater is, and here's the Rift Valley. But I realized that you didn't come for like a video journaling, so I have a few of those pictures that are in here. Let's see. Oh, and the image there, I just love this image. It's taken from one of the schools that we collected data at, and it was the girls' school, and it's an image of a young woman reading, and it's just kind of nice and a powerful image you just don't really get a chance to see. So just a quick acknowledgement. There's a few people I want to acknowledge. One is Anne, who is in Alutima, who's in the room. Anne helped prepare me for Tanzania. Prior to going to Tanzania, she sat patiently with me to try to teach me Kiswahili. It's, you know, when you're in your 50s and you try to learn a language, it's tough. But it was really wonderful, so I want to acknowledge Anne, so thank you so much. And I also want to acknowledge my host, who's all the way, I guess, to the left here, Eugenia Kafanabo. And she's the one who hosted my visit. And this was taken when we went to the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. Embassy invited us out to think about ways to address gender-based violence in Tanzania, and we were going to partner with them on an activity. And I'll spare you the drama, but we decided to move ahead on something that we were gonna do that I'll talk to you a little bit later. And the last image, this other image, as you can see, these adorable children are from Tandale Primary School, and I have this school project thing that I'm fundraising activity that I'm going to talk about at the very end. And you can see how I had brought my camera, and they were like, "Yeah, take a picture of me, yes!" And they are so adorable and full of life, and it was just a real treat to be with them. And one of our College of Education alumni is doing some work with them, Tage Biswalo, who teaches at the University of Dar es Salaam. So a little bit about what I tried to do while I was there was just this cultural immersion. Once I got there, things were so different, even though I had traveled several times there, but things were really different. So just trying to immerse myself into the culture. And then there's teaching and research that I was going to talk about. And, you know, so I started taking my Kiswahili lessons. And now I just wish I had more compassion for my 4-year-old grandchild who lived with us for a year, teaching him to read. I was like, oh, come on, we just went over it. And I felt like they were saying, we just went over it. And I understand now when he says his head hurts. I get it, I get it. And things are, I mean, they're very similar because we're all human and we have human emotions, but it was very different living in a collectivistic culture. And people in Tanzania are very warm and very friendly. So some of the collectivistic culture pieces were like greetings. Here we say, hey, how are you? There it's like, how are you? How you been? How's your family? What's going on? Everything's fine. Are you yes, like yes. And so if you don't follow those norms, you're considered very rude. And even if I'm like purchasing a newspaper, I'm like, oh, can I have this? They're like, I'm fine. How are you? Oh, yes. How are you? And one of the nice things I did like about, you know, the collectivistic culture was also how it was nice to have age privilege, so people respect elders, and it's all the way in the way that people are greeted. So if you're an elder or older person or older than the person who's you're greeting, is like shikamo, which is like a very sign of respect, a hello that you wouldn't say normally. And there's a response that you have to that. Tanzania, the founder of Tanzania, the father of Tanzania, is the founder of African socialism. And so he really pushed for a national identity to, and so while tribal identity or ethnic identities are important, the national identity to be Tanzanian is important, and a sense of family is important. So part of that is everybody's mother, everybody's father, everybody's sister, everybody's, and so you can go out and I'm just mama, da 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 da. If I was younger, I would be dada, that would be sister. You can go anywhere, you just say sister, da 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 da, or mother. So that was kind of interesting. The other piece about older aspects was like to be called mzee is old person, old man, old woman. And here, if you were called that, it would be like, oh, that's kind of rude. But there, it's a sign of respect. So there was a whole host of things. Other quick observations that were just real different was like time. So I'm trying to get my time straight in Swahili. And while people will, they will do the Western time, I tried to do the time in Tanzania. And the way, if it's 12 o'clock our time, it's 6 o'clock their time, not in terms of the time, but literally what they say. They go, the way in which the time is perceived is differently. So 7 o'clock is 1 o'clock, 7 o'clock a.m. our time is 1 o'clock their time, but it would be the first hour of light, the second hour of light, the third hour. So it makes a lot of sense, but it was then trying to get, I always messed up the time. Oh, pick me up at this time, and I'd get it wrong. So, and there was just real quick, one other observation about, I had so many things, family, education system, all the things that I wanted to say. One thing I will say about the education system that was really interesting, and it has to do with language. Since I'm not as familiar with the British education system, that was a little harder for me to get around how the whole education system worked. But education is in Kiswahili during primary school, and then they take English as a subject. And when they get to secondary school, everything is switched to English. So it's kind of interesting, and what's interesting about that is that if you turn on the radio and you talk to your parents, all in Kiswahili. So only the instruction in secondary schools are in English. So that creates a really interesting dynamic. And then who can go to school, who can't. So I just, whole host of things, but I wish I had more time to. It was really an exciting time to be in Tanzania. It was the time that they had an election. It was the first year that the first election that the opposition party had a chance to actually win. And it was an election of big, what do they call it? Big rallies, 50, 60,000 people would go. And they would tell us, no, don't go. If you're American, stay home. And this was actually taken at the inauguration. So a week after the election, they had inauguration, a couple of days after. And I had a young roommate who was from the US working in England, and she was a grad student. I said, okay, I have 2 bedrooms, come stay with me for a couple months or a month and a half while you're here, and she did. And so she said, like, let's go. So there's 2 football stadiums filled with people to attend. You don't really need a ticket. They don't have guns there. You can bring your food in or whatever. And it was really kind of nice. So we pushed our way. We're in the second stadium overlooking what's happening in the first area. And so that was a real exciting time. The ruling party won, and one of the things that the President John Magufuli was trying to do is to end corruption in the country, but talking to people now, there's some other issues that are going on with that. But it's a very exciting time. The other thing that he did that was important was that education now is free. Primary and secondary education is free for everyone. The school fees, the small school fees that were attached previously were no longer attached. So now we see unprecedented numbers of folks entering primary and secondary schools. And that's a big deal for young girls there. So Just a real quick story. I stayed in this research flats, which are basically dorms, and they're dorm rooms, but I had a flat that had 2 bedrooms. And the guy over here, just a real quick story, he's from Ethiopia, he's Eritrean from Ethiopia, and in 1958 or whatever, he's one of 5 students that's selected by the Ethiopian government to study in the United States for high school for a year. And he goes to at the high school, Urbana High School. So talking to him about Urbana High School as an African student in 1958 was really interesting. He goes on to get his Ph.D. in statistics at Penn State, and he's taught all over Africa in Penn State. And the other woman, one woman all the way to the right is my colleague and collaborator, and the other woman, who's white, has been living in Africa for 28 years, teaching at the University of Ghana, Legon, for 27. And I said, oh, how often do you get back to the States? 4 times for conferences, that's it. So she's obviously. So teaching, I want to talk a little bit about teaching. This is me and some of the doctoral students that I taught in research writing class. And there's an article by, I think his name was Tom Waters or something like that. And essentially, he talked about his experience teaching in the US, in Germany, and in Tanzania. And what he was told was, teach just like you do in America. And then what happened was, that when he started teaching like he did in America, it just didn't work. All kinds of stuff happened, and I noticed that as well. But I taught a research writing class to primarily doctoral students in the College of Education. As you can probably see here, they would be considered non-traditional students, but they go to school after they have families. Like, it's a real privilege to go back for your degree. And so after they have families, they go back for their degrees. And they were just doing really interesting topics on, we had a geographer talking about how to sustain, certain conservation sites, but neoliberal policies that undermine that. Interesting questions about education, the role of religious education in non-secular fields and what that means. It was fascinating. But how people write were very different, and how you structure writing was different, how to negotiate access to materials was different. So the way they work there is you create your syllabus, and then you don't have a sign because people don't have money to buy books. And you have like, here's the books that we recommend, but there's really no way to get the books. And then here are the concepts and all the things were covered, and you're responsible for figuring out how you're going to learn those concepts, like where you're going to get the reading from, and then you just lecture, and they have to come in with a general idea of stuff. So I tried to find articles and books that were online. But also, the doctoral students had computers, but that's, not everybody did. But access to internet is really expensive and very slow, so not everybody has access. And so it just became a little bit difficult. And one time, and then there's the language difference, so it's taught in English, and I would try to teach, and so in here, I was trying to enunciate each of my words so that people can understand me clearly, and that only confused people more. And so I realized later on, what they communicated to me was that my slang, so the more I tried to enunciate it, the more it was slang. It was, in the US, they can't understand us because we overemphasize our R's. And there, they don't have an ER, they don't have it's an A. So much like British, so when I would say computer, it would confuse them. Bird, it would confuse them anymore. And so we tried to negotiate that, and they finally said, can you bring PowerPoints in? So we was like, okay. So it was just kind of nice to realize how that worked. I found a great book online about how teaching international students here about how to write in English, and that was really helpful. So while people spoke English, they wrote English really well, there's some ways in which we formulate arguments that are a little different than their indigenous language. So that was kind of nice to get a chance to see. So one of the projects that I worked on was this #PowerUp Youth Civic Engagement project. My student in my lab here did our little design for us, and it's looking at civic engagement in the United States and in Tanzania, and we quickly realized that we weren't going to be able to do a cross-cultural study. One, some of the context is so different. Some of the ways the initial data was collected was very different. So I'll just walk us through some of this, and then I'm going to I'll leave some time for people to ask questions. Okay, just real quickly, what's civic engagement? It's individual and collective action taken to identify and address pressing societal concerns. And so concepts of civics, usually it involves a range of activities, including volunteerism, joining community groups, in addition to participation in electoral politics. So that's kind of what we basically know. So why is civic engagement even important? Well, we know in general, at least in the United States, it enhances youth school performance and psychological well-being. It promotes community well-being in general. And it's critical in aspect of living in and sustaining a democratic society. So what are some of the gaps in the literature? So although we know that civic engagement is an important developmental task for youth as they transition into adulthood, it really is understudied in African countries. So for example, currently the most comprehensive international study to date, the IEA Civic Engagement Study, did not collect data in an African country. So some have like 28 countries that collected data, some in 40-something countries, and no country in Africa is included. They have South American countries, Asian countries, Europe, and North America are really represented. So we wanted to, and they have smaller studies though in East Africa and in North Africa, but one of the things that we wanted to do is to look at what do youth identify as really, what are those pressing concerns in their everyday life? What do they see as important? And what would they like to see done, address, and what have they done, and what do they plan on doing? So that once we have that information, we can really understand the context in which civic engagement occurs, and also take a look at some of the measures that are used to look at civic engagement, and then ultimately trying to then go into the schools and administer surveys, et cetera. So, but just even getting a sense of what's going on was really different and getting my mind around it. So phase one and then phase two. Phase one was really my Kafanabo and her assistant started to collect data with, I think there was like 8 focus groups, 48 students, and they're attending government schools and both all-girls schools as well as co-ed schools in 2 regions. The Pwani region is the coast region, and Dar es Salaam. So I was living in Dar es Salaam, which is also a port area. It's by the beach, so it's kind of nice. They had these cute little islands off of Dar es Salaam, which was wonderful to go and visit. This is a little side. I didn't talk about Dar es Salaam. It took me months to get used to Dar es Salaam because it's like, it's really wonderful, it's bustling, but even from an LA person, it's a lot happening in Dar es Salaam. So you have maybe officially it's 4.5 million, unofficially 6 million, and there's no highway because it was built like, oh, we didn't know the city was gonna be this big, and it just kind of was built that way. So there's no highway, so there's streets. And then we don't have we have dala-dalas, which are buses, but we don't have like boda-bodas, which are motorcycles where people ride. So people ride motorcycles as taxis, and bajajis, which are 3-wheeled motorcycles that are covered. So they have those in India. So you have and the cars on the highway, on the streets. And if you're a motorcycle, you can go this way. And if you're in a bajaji, you can go backwards, around, cut across. There's nothing that can prepare you for the traffic. And so in that sense, it was pretty intense. So when you went out into the city, there were some intense moments. But then I learned to love it, the different areas, the art areas. Different parts of the beaches were really interesting and very beautiful. So anyway, so we looked at the Dar es Salaam and the Pwani Coast areas, and then also phase 2 was where we went and talked to students at one of the girls' schools, because we wanted to confirm kind of, here's our initial conceptualization of what's going on. Does this make sense for you all? Do you have additional kind of comments that you want to make? These I just grabbed off the web, these images. So we use standard thematic analysis steps, incorporating specifically steps that involve focus group thematic analysis, which are different than if you were going to talk about individual levels. What did we find? You can't see this as clear, and I'm not, because of time, and I'm not going to go into all of the discussions here, but part of really what was central to these young, what I would think were like girls and boys, but then what I realized is that secondary school, you can be 21 in high school, so 18, because of the way in which the system, who has access to education at what time. So you have 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds in the secondary schools. So they were really insightful about stuff. So really looking at this issue about corruption and misuse of resources as really structuring their entire lived experiences, all the way from poverty to the limited resources and lack of development. What we have here, I'll spend some time talking about gender-based violence and discrimination, because that's some of the project that we're going on, to bias and conflict. And the bias and conflict, that was an interesting thing. That dealt with some ethnic or tribal conflict and bias between religion. However, what I didn't talk about is that's about 33%, 40% Muslim, 40% Catholic, Christian, and then the rest have African religion. But unlike here in the United States, everybody gets along. You can intermarry. It's not polite to discriminate against someone because of religion. Like, that would be against cultural norms, and you can't highlight it. So for example, Lawasa, who was the opposition party person who was running for election, he's Lutheran, and he publicly said, oh, this will be the first time a Lutheran would be elected if you vote for me. And that was like, no, you can't say that. You can't, that's not okay. It's also not okay to talk about people's race or ethnicity. They're like, we're all Tanzanians, so if somebody's of Indian descent in Tanzania, and you can't, and they had a sizable number of Chinese. So you couldn't say any, people can't, it just socially not okay. And also that talked about the poverty and corruption bled down into the diminished school and learning environment, which was really critical, because the school and learning environment, unlike here, food is not provided. There's not, in many schools, there's not a cafeteria. And so they would have mamaliches, and folks, women coming to the schools and cooking, which would be very nice, but you can't control the quality, and then not everybody has money to buy food. So we would see kids in school all day long with no food, like in terms of that. The other thing is, in some of the schools that were in the cities, that there's not a distinction between the school districts and the businesses. So you can have a school and right next to it is an open bar or this or that. There's not a separation. So those are the kinds of things. And all of that influences their safety, health, and well-being that they talked about. So I can't go into all of that, but I'll talk about some of the things. So corruption and misuse of resources. So this is from, these quotes are conducted, were from the interviews that myself and Dr. Sharon Bethia conducted. And they were conducted in English and they're incredibly insightful. Problems like corruption, selflessness, unfaithful leaders, all these problems come from people not being patriotic. So what's interesting is they connect this notion of patriotism to the issue about civic engagement and the other kinds of things. Because if they were, problems like corruption would not have occurred in the community. I can say that Tanzania is a rich country, but the resources have been used in a wrong way. Those resources for all people, they're for all people to enjoy, for all the country members to enjoy, but they've been using them for their own benefit, which is not right. So which is interesting, although the country has moved away from African socialism, you still see this kind of embedded in some of the cultural traditions, like this should be for everybody. You know, if people are making money, especially in Tanzania, if you're making a lot of money, you're like, are you that important that you need to be making more money than everybody else? I mean, that's kind of the thing. Other things like faculty members, people don't like drive really nice cars even if they have money. So I've been into other African countries where they have Mercedes and this. That's not as common. And it's looked at as, if you show off your wealth, it's looked at as bad taste, like you're showing off, at least from what I observed. So it's kind of much more, we're in this together, and people really looked out after folks who didn't have as much money. There was a lot more compassion for people who didn't have as much money, and a lot more, we all deserve a lot better. And so this is what Javier was talking about. And the nice thing here is that she also mentioned in terms of how wealthy the country is. They have a lot of resources, natural resources. They found gas, so there's worried about what is this going to mean. They have, minerals. The one aspect that I'll talk about is gender-based violence and discrimination. And the first kind of quote here focuses on just the first thing about gendered discrimination. Girls not having, just being discriminated against through patriarchy. And they talked about in political issues and education issues, girls really discussed that. And then they also talked about gender-based violence. And gender-based violence is similar to how it's expressed here, but there's some differences. In Africa, they call it gender-based violence. Here, we call it sexual assault. There, it would include things all the way from genital mutilation. It would include things like child marriages. Even though child marriages is outlawed in the country, there are some smaller areas that still practice that. If they do, it's against the law and the person could be punished. But there's some other subtle ways that GBV works that I think probably works here, but we need to kind of explore that. And those could be, it's not, some people talk about it as GBV, other people don't. It's this murky area, transactional sex. So people engage in, I can be your girlfriend for a day, a month, a year. You're going to pay my school fees. You're going to do this. And it's understood. So at what point does it become abusive? Because it's, so and how old is a person? So there's some things that get to that. But here's this quote from Name. I'm the first in my family to graduate secondary school, and my mom depends on me. When I'm finished with my school, I want to be employed. So the employer, he doesn't give me a job because maybe I'm not from the right tribe or he needs money from him. You see the problem? You're going to do a sexual kind of corruption. They also called it corruption. They put this, so you have to do sexual favors in order to get jobs. So they talked about that as a form of gender-based violence. So in terms of and I can't go through all the quotes, but they were incredibly insightful. So talking about how they want to and what do they think to address the issues, what are the important ones, they really want to talk about prioritizing development, and that was all the way from infrastructure, telecommunications, water, and I can just attest, it's a developing country, and living in a developing country, you realize the wealth that the US has. And just like when I first went, I was staying when they were having the elections. So it was the time leading up to the elections. And so it seems like that's when a lot of the resources, the lights would go out further. You wouldn't have communication stuff. So it's just different to go into a house and go, oh, I forgot to plug in my stuff. The lights are out. Oh, darn it. When are they going to come back on? Or water, or some people don't have water. I remember one week our water was brown, and it was like, oh, why is our water brown? So after that week of brown water, I got a little filter, but it was fine. Eradicating poverty, and this is really interesting. One of the things they'd like to see addressed is ways to promote love, respect, and compassion. And those are really some of the words that they use. And instill patriotism, because patriotism to them really was this notion of giving to the community as a whole and thinking beyond just yourself. So the actions that aren't typically talked about in civic engagement is this notion of educating friends and colleagues, you know. Talk to people about the importance of receipts, like why you need to have receipts. Talk to them about rights. Talk to folks about GBV, what it is, and being a leader and a role model. That was one. I see there's a problem of gender discrimination out there. There's a problem where boys or men are given much more priority than us. I used to study in a school where there's two genders, girls and boys. I contested for leadership position, and by doing that, I also won. So by doing that, I also could show the people that even girls could be leaders and lead the proper way, the same or even better than boys. So this notion of kind of that was what's important. And I don't think those kinds of things are typically talked about in the civic engagement literature. So, and it wasn't really talked about when we did interviews here in the US. What are we doing with this? So one of the things, all of the groups that were with young women identified gender as being an important issue. I mentioned earlier when we went to the embassy, we talked about doing an event. Won't go into that, but we decided to do our own. And there's this 16 Days of Activism, which is a UN-sponsored kind of worldwide event about ending violence against women and girls. So we decided to do a 16 Days of Activism event at the University of Dar es Salaam campus. We partnered with the UN Women in Tanzania, and so you have the shirts there. That it was Orange the World, and then so that they gave us some free shirts. And what does it say? Can you read the saying? What does it say? Okay. Open up. So it's open up about, I could never get somebody to translate exactly, open up about gender, but people knew if you wore the shirts, we wore the shirts, they knew. And so we planned this day-long event, and what was really exciting about this is that I convinced 4 of my former advisees, come out to Tanzania, it's gonna be fun, and you can present at the conference. I have no money to pay you, but you can write it off on your taxes. And they came, and it's really expensive, because it's like, I don't know, $1,200, $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 just for the ticket. I said, I'm gonna house you there, and we're going to do a safari afterward. We're going to go to Zanzibar. So they came out and they presented at the conference as well. And it was really meaningful for folks to understand that GBV is not just something of concern in Tanzania, but it's a broader concern. And for those people who know Bree, they were really inspired by her, because Bree is, she has a prosthetic. And part of her thing is she wore like shorts or whatever. And people were like, disability is perceived as kind of a new issue in Tanzania. So to see a young woman with a prosthetic leg showing her leg, it was like, this is so wonderful, thank you. She was such a role model to folks, so they really appreciated that. And this is after the day-long event. There was over 100 people that came. We had people from lawyers talk, we had somebody from the UN talk, we had our 4 presenters and other presenters talk. This here are the 4 presenters, and Tage, who's an alumni who teaches at the University of Dar es Salaam. And the day that they got there, I took them all, we went to go get our hair done, so we all had African hairstyles, and they went and got outfits along the way, we went shopping, so just get all into it. And there they create these big signs to announce events. So there was a sign, several signs throughout campus to announce it. What came from that, I don't know if I didn't bring that. I put together a working paper on ending violence against women and girls. One of the cultural things that I did not mention, there's 2 things that I'll talk about. One is this one, you can't say no in Tanzania. Like it's like considered rude, and somebody asks you to do something, you can't say no. So like Tage, he gets assigned classes, and their undergraduate classes in education are 1,800 students. And so he is responsible for teaching and he can't say, no, I don't want to teach 1,800 students. And so they might like tag team, but can you imagine 1,800 students to teach? And at the end, you have exams that are like this table long and this table high, of 1,800 exams that have essays that are written that you have to read. So they have grading parties and all of that other stuff. Yeah, it's pretty intense, but he does it. I think he teaches one of those classes. And then when I went to the faculty meeting, they have all 1,800 student names if you have a class of 1,800, because they have several. And then if someone like missed the final, you're like, well, what happened to so-and-so? How come their grade is such and such? So you have to know each of those 1,800 students if they're not performing and why. That's a real commitment to folks' development. So anyway, so having that as a backdrop, I was asked the day before the conference, can you write the speech for what would be consistent with our provost? Write the speech for the conference for him now. And I had all this other stuff, and you can't say no. So I wrote the speech, and it is what it is. I'll tell you the other story about not saying no. So just the follow-up, the things that I've done, I taught the 3 courses. I'm trying to learn Kiswahili, and then finally I had to give up for a while because just another little, they have these, I was doing good, they have these, is it 7, 8, how many noun classes? 18 noun classes, and there's different this, that's, this, that goes with it. It changes the verb based on the noun class, and some of the noun classes are like, oh, it's borrowed words, so you don't change such and such. But I don't know if it's borrowed because it's from, Arabic or I don't know. It was just got really complicated for me. So I'm going back, and Anne is generous enough to meet with me weekly, and we're gonna make it happen. So we've got a manuscript that we are just about done. I helped them organize the Ending the GBV symposium, put together the working papers, and then also, this is another kind of a no, like you can't say no. My host collected about over 4,000 observations about how what we call middle school age kids were thinking about gender-based violence. And so that's a lot. And so she's like, oh, can you help them just create this? I'm like, okay, so we're working it. And that thing blossomed, training people how to code, but they have to change things because it's in Swahili, and I have to understand, well, this is it. So she told the secretary, her sister, and her son, we're putting together our own research team. So it was just a lot, and it was wonderful, but it was a lot to go through. And then I'm like, okay, I'm done. But they're like, oh no, but it needs to be entered. And here's your 1,000 to enter. And I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do this. But 2 weeks later, it was done. So moving forward, one of the things that we're really interested in is putting together a University of Dar es Salaam, University of Illinois, gender-based violence participatory action research project. We've got a whole host of young women there, and the 2 women that are on our right are people in my lab now. I just grabbed these from WhatsApp. We just have our WhatsApp group first of all. We're starting to get to know each other. And the 2 on the left are the young participants in Dar es Salaam, but they have about 10. And so now we're in the process of really trying to understand, well, how is it that we want to understand GBV, and how can we conduct a cross-cultural kind of research collaboration that involves both qualitative observation and quantitative pieces to it. So the challenge is that we are on different cycles. Like their school doesn't start, when they were ready, we were out of session. We're ready, their school doesn't start till October. Most people don't have access to the internet. It's very expensive. So we created a Facebook page, but not everyone had a Facebook page. And then not everyone has the phones that you can get online, but everyone has WhatsApp. So we created a WhatsApp group, and we're starting our community there. And like on Saturdays, like 50 messages on a WhatsApp group. So it's kind of, it's nice. People are introducing themselves. So we'll see where that goes. My hope is that it would develop into also an exchange where students there can come here and we can go there and begin to collect the data, analyze the data. So I'm really excited about that. Just real quick, Tanzania is really beautiful. I know I told you about all the traffic jams and the things that were, but take a look at this. I caught this image. We were driving up into this remote area. The sun was coming and I was just like, oh, can you stop? And I love baobab trees. Huh? Oh, no, neither. Going up to, up north, past Pwani, past, where they make, what's Tonga region, going up to the Tonga region, yeah. So we went to the caves up there. Stop, let me take an image. Oh, are you? We have to talk. Yeah, Zanzibar really is this beautiful. It was pretty remarkable. This was just at a fancy hotel. I didn't do fancy hotels, but this is a fancy hotel that we stayed at. That was one of the few ones. But it also has a dark side, and I didn't get a chance to upload that. You know, the Arab slavery was there in Tanzania, and so they have a memorial, and they have, you know, the slave dungeons that you can visit. Stone Town is a remarkable place to kind of go. We got a chance to see the Big Five. This wasn't my best picture of a lion, but this was one time. This is Ngorongoro. Ngorongoro. We went. Ngorongoro is great because it's not one of the national. It's a part of the national park, but it's a conservation area. So you have people and animals, and they had. Oh, I don't think I have my Maasai in here. So anyway, just real quick. This is the story of. So when we went on our. You have to go through Ngorongoro to get to the Serengeti, and we all went. This is when what they call themselves the Fab Four. My 4 former students, they call themselves the Fab Four. So they wanted the like $6,000 safari. We really had money for the $1,100 safari. So the $1,100 safari comes with camping on the ground and the car breaking down a couple times. So they were not happy about the car breaking down in the middle of Serengeti or in the middle of Ngorongoro, but I'm kind of, it's all good. So this is one of I had lots of pictures. It's really rare to see black rhinos. This was also in Ngorongoro. Ngorongoro is also really quite remarkable because inside there they have Olduvai Gorge, which is the most significant archaeological site. They have predating Lucy, they have like early remains that are found there in Olduvai Gorge. So it's just really an interesting place to be. The African buffalo. I had cheetahs. I mean, I had leopards and cheetahs, but I couldn't get my act together to put them on here. So can you guys see his 5th leg there, which is kind of remarkable. So just saying. We were really close to the elephants. This is actually going through the Rift Valley, and so these are the Maasai. It's just going through the Rift Valley is remarkably beautiful. So these are really remote areas. But in the cities, you would also see the Maasai, and I hate to exoticize folks, but it was just, they'd be in the cities and they would dress in their traditional beautiful Maasai outfits, and they'd have cell phones, and so it was just. And this is Lake Nitron. So after you go through the Rift Valley, you get to Lake Nitron. And those are flamingos, lesser flamingos, which are just beautiful. They're little small ones. I could have just had tons of pictures of Lake Nitron. And so I just went, and like kids are kids, no matter where you go. You see these cuties. And I think the bell was ringing, and so they wanted to jump up and go to the bell, and they're just, so in terms of the girls have short hair and the boys have short hair, I think you have to get to a certain age before if you go to public school, before you grow your hair out, and that way there's no discrimination against and they're just lively and adorable. And these are these wonderful people who made the research flats enjoyable for me to kind of stay and help me navigate cultural situations. And this was at one of the retirement parties that they had for the person who was in charge of the research flats. So, questions, comments, thoughts? Yes?
Thank you for your very good presentation. I'm from Tanzania. I'm here in Tanzania as a research scholar, Department of Geography.
Yay, well, we're going to have to connect then.
All right. I just wanted to comment on the education system in Tanzania because I think we visited on the
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Because right now we have private schools
Mm-hmm.
and government schools.
Mm-hmm.
Private schools, they teach English from
Mm-hmm.
kindergarten up to class 7.
Mm-hmm.
And also when you go to secondary schools, we have government schools and then we have also private schools.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the teaching system in the government school is quite different than the private school.
Mm-hmm.
Private schools are much better.
Mm-hmm.
And you see now there is a very big gap between those who are studying at the government schools and at the private schools.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them are aiming up to the university.
Mm-hmm.
Going to the, for example, University of Dar es
Mm-hmm.
Salaam, University of Dodoma.
Mm-hmm.
And also at the university level, we have also government
Mm-hmm.
universities and we have
Mm-hmm.
private
Mm-hmm.
universities. And you see this gap also is, you can see when the people are graduating, you can really see it when they start working.
Mm-hmm.
Those who were brought up in private systems, they are very good.
Mm-hmm.
Confidence, the way they present issues, analysis, critical analysis. But when you go to those who are coming from, you may wonder somebody is a graduate from the University of Dar es Salaam, but he cannot even explain himself, or he doesn't even confident
Mm-hmm.
on what he's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to point it out that Tanzania should make effort to make sure that to come with a system and to reduce the gap between the government schools and private system, because that
Mm-hmm.
is also ruining the education system.
Mm-hmm. That's a really important point. Thank you for sharing that. Also, before I'm doing a fundraiser, I'm gonna pass this out for folks for one of the schools that that Tage is involved in. He's transforming this one school at a time, and any assistance that people can make would be very, very good. Essentially, he's working in the poorest school district in Dar es Salaam, and it's Tandale Primary School. And right now, we're raising funds to. He's already got the computer lab, and we're raising funds for the library and the student and the faculty resource center for that one school. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, yes. Oh, I don't have my cards with me. Let me see. I'm awful. Do you have a card? Oh, my number. Yeah, if you can give her that. Yes, my number's on there. My email's on there. Yes. Oh, Sante. Kwaheri. All right.